A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mwangu Shampagi. Almost 18 minutes after 10 o'clock on this Sunday evening, we'll be looking at major developments during the week, and one of the major developments just hot off the press we are beginning to learn. There are two particular issues. One is another major international leak of information and documents about who has the money and where they keep it, something called the Paradise Papers, latest offshore data leak. If people remember the Panama Papers that dealt with that firm, Fonseca, which revealed a lot of monies stashed away in what do you call them? What do you call them? Tax havens, or something like that. But for Uganda specifically, one of the major developments happening this afternoon, happened today afternoon, there is a new report that's been released talking about South Sudan and how money was siphoned out of the Juba Treasury through letters of credit. In that report, it indicates that some United States dollars 498 million came to Uganda. For what reason, nobody knows. That's about $500 million. 338 went to Kenya. Other beneficiaries, Bahrain, Germany, and the United Arab Emirates. Details are still scant on these stories, but they will be emerging. Domestically, the National Resistance Movement has deployed its top guns to mobilize where their members of parliament have failed. I've seen from the Prime Minister, Dr. Hakana Rugunda, to Brigadier Matayo Chaligonza, who apparently in that SEC meeting was opposed to the lifting of the age limit. Alepa, is that how he's pronounced? Alepa Simon? Aleper. That one has also been deployed, and people across the country, the NIM has deployed starting tomorrow. I saw yellow vans, yellow buses of the NRM beginning to move to the countryside to promote the lifting of the age limit. Doctors have insisted they are going on strike. They have announced their strike will go on as planned. And of course, Rebecca Kadaga, Speaker of Parliament, writes to President Museveni asking the President to explain the people who invaded Parliament and removed members of Parliament. To discuss those among other issues in a roundup of the week, I have Nicholas Opio. Very nice to have you, Nick.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for inviting me, and good evening to all my fellow panelists.
Nicholas Opio is
I'm just a lawyer.
He's a lawyer and head chapter 4.
It's nothing more than I'm just a lawyer.
You're more than a lawyer because you chair the board of Action Aid Uganda, and Action Aid Uganda has been having issues with the Uganda police and the Uganda government.
We haven't had issues with them. They are the ones having issues with us. we are fine with them.
Onapito Ekomoloit, Legal and Corporate Affairs Director, Nile Breweries AB InBev. Ona, always a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Charles. Good evening.
And making
the only non-lawyer who is a legal director.
And making a return after some weeks of absence, Ivan Okuda. Ivan is a student at the Law Development Center and a journalist at the Daily Monitor.
Thank you, Charles. Profoundly humbled to be back here, and a very good evening to our beloved viewers.
Gentlemen, let's start with that intriguing letter from Speaker Rebecca Kadaga to President Museveni, asking him to explain the circumstances under which people were deployed, who the people were, and what the command structure was, who commanded the operation. Ivan, we saw the Speaker of Parliament a day after that eviction, violent as it was, sitting through hours of praise singing from members of the National Resistance Movement, because at that time the opposition had already boycotted. The remaining members of the opposition had walked out after the failed attempts by the leader of opposition in Parliament, Winnie Kiza, to get the Speaker to listen to their side of the story. Listening through hours of praise. Did the letter surprise you?
Well, it didn't, because as a student of literature, especially English literature, I've been schooled to appreciate that the world is a theater of deception, appearances, and posturing, and therefore, especially in the context of a politician like Miss Rebecca Kadaga, it's not surprising that she would have to pull off a stunt like that to, for all intents and purposes, reclaim an image that's been brutally battered by the events that happened at Parliament. Of course,
just
too late.
battered, or maybe she got some reflection when she visited these members, because she visited all the members that had been beaten.
Certainly not.
And those who ended up in hospital.
Certainly not, for three reasons. One, at the height of the tension that eventually resulted into the brutal eviction of the MPs, especially from the opposition and sections of progressive members of the NRM, opposed to this nefarious plot to amend the constitution to allow Mr. Museveni to be elected president. The Speaker did go ahead and chair or preside over a session of Parliament that, for all intents and purposes, was a conversion of the NRM caucus. And he also did go ahead and object and essentially blatantly refused to listen to a very important point raised by the indomitable leader of opposition in Parliament, Ms. Winnie Kiza, that essentially wrong. And then after that, you had a motion in Parliament moved by members of the NRM in a session presided over by the Speaker of Parliament, to the effect that the Speaker should be commended for having
handling.
Yes. So I think a coagulation of all those events deny the Speaker any possible chance at reclaiming her image. Not even the visit in the hospital of the injured or members of the opposition. So I think it's a little too late. But I also have a feeling that Kadaga is playing on a very slippery ground. I have it on good authority, for example, that she's interested in the presidency, just like many others in the NRM. And that complicates her relationship with the NRM, with President Museveni, and that reduces Parliament to a playground of internal contradictions and struggles for power within the NRM. That means we're going to continue to see members of the NRM, including members of the First Family, who either want to have a grip of Mr. Museveni's reign, or also want to have a chance at the presidency, going to do anything and everything to undermine the Speaker. And therefore, she, I think, in the last incident, fell in that trap. And it's not surprising that you had the letter that leaked, purportedly response by the President to the Speaker, which, of course, Mr. Don Wanyama, the spokesman of the President, has clarified was not authored by the President. But if you read the content of that letter, the description of events, including meetings of the National Security Council, are actually accurate. So it's also possible that possibly somebody wanted to respond to Kadaga and expose the double standards without necessarily doing so in an official manner. So I think Parliament is going to be an interesting space to watch, especially considering that position that Kadaga finds herself in.
Honor, can Kadaga reclaim?
Well, I think
some positions.
as Ivan said, it's a bit too late, too little. You know, I think the Speaker is heavily conflicted at this point. For long, her claim to fame, for which she really won a lot of national and international acclaim, was a perceived neutrality, or call it independence, in the fight between the President and his enemies in the Parliament, or his opponents in Parliament at various points. She was seen to have not exactly stood up to the President, but steered carefully on the slippery edges of being both an NRM national leader as well as a Speaker of supposedly another arm of
an independent arm of government.
So I think this was the biggest test, and I think shortly before that that fracas in Parliament, personally I thought maybe if she really wanted to go down in history with that perceived clout, she had to resign at that point. Because the stakes were so high, there was no way she was going to remain neutral. She had to choose a side. President Museveni knew this was a high stakes game, and he did the equivalent of smearing blood on her lips, you know, after the animal has been beaten. So, and she really So if she wanted to retain that original clout as an independent speaker, perhaps the most, and being a female at the same time, this was a time when she had to resign. But unfortunately, maybe rationally, she didn't resign.
It didn't make sense for her to resign.
Yeah, so now that she did what she did, she just has to stick it out to the bitter end. Because I think the people, the opposition members were really so frustrated and so disappointed. They had for long thought she was
an ally.
She was their last refuge, the hour of need. But she cast them out to the walls, and the world saw everything else. So of course now, but you can't say that this letter is in vain. She may still save something out of it. At least she has the strength to write to the president. Of course, people expect that the president will answer in a strong way, perhaps not to dismiss her, but to defend the decision of the security forces. But at least she will be seen to have tried her best. And it's also possible that she really was touched by the pain of her members. Of course, in the heat of the moment, you can excuse her for having said she was also a victim in many ways, you know. And when these opposition people were expecting her at that moment to stand up for them, maybe it was being unfair. So she was naturally irritated fairly. So now when things calmed down and she went to see Namboze and the other MP
you first reviewed the CCTV footage of what happened.
You can say maybe she's genuinely touched by their suffering and feels she should actually ask the president to explain. So what? Again, at the end of the day, she lost.
How would that fit in, Nicholas, if it is indeed true, like that fake letter purported, but what actually was reported, that we know that the speaker held a meeting with, among others, the prime minister, and that meeting was attended by some people from security, heads of security, to plan. I think the IGP was there. Yes, IGP was there, and other people were there. If that is the sequence of events, that a plan was made, a discussion was held between the executive arm of government and the legislative arm of government in anticipation of events that were about to happen. If this was a country where you would have a leak of the transcript, a recording of what happened inside that meeting, who said what, would this letter in any way help the speaker?
Well, first of all, I think it is important to just underline the fact that the speaker was a complete embarrassment in the way she handled the proceedings of Parliament on that day. What the MPs were involved in is a common practice all over parliamentary proceedings called filibustering, where you make a nuisance of yourself to stop the other side from making the argument that they want to make. It is legitimate, it is lawful, it is envisaged by the rules of procedure of Parliament, and I think that it broke down into a melee when strangers were allowed to go into the House. Now, the Speaker's actions, in my view, are prompted not by the need to try and reclaim her glory. She knows she's lost it. I think the Speaker is being pushed by two fundamental things, and I have this on good authority. The first one is national, one is international. You do remember that the Honorable Dongauto authored a letter to the Interparliamentary Union in which the Speaker is the president for the Africa Group. She has been put under a lot of pressure internationally to explain what exactly she did on the floor of the House. The African Peer Review Group have also demanded for an answer. The African Union have demanded for an answer. The Pan-African Parliament have demanded for an answer. And she's under immense pressure internationally because she has a lot of clout when she goes out there. She thinks that the things she does here may never make it across the borders. We are living in an information revolution. You cannot go to Kamuli and you say what happened in Parliament was a coup and you acted to stop a coup and thinking that that information will only remain in Kamuli. It has made its way around the world and she's under immense pressure to respond. But nationally, what is happening is that the only MPs the Speaker has been able to meet after the incident have been MPs on their sick beds. She has asked for a meeting from the Honorable Winnie Kiza. She has refused to meet her. She said, no, it's not your time to meet you. She's asked for a meeting with the Honorable Semujungada, I know this for a fact. And they've all said, we cannot meet you now. If we are to meet you, we'll meet you later, but as a group. So she's isolated. The people in the NRM now, having made her do what she did, have left her on her own. They're now using other structures to promote their interests. Kadaga is now not useful. So she's under
It's not the
immense,
purpose.
immense pressure, and then that she's just isolated and she's just clinging on to anything she can get. The truth of the matter is she was involved in some meetings with the president. She was involved with meetings with the IGP to plan out to deal with opposition MPs in what they thought was going to be a violent event in Parliament. It is for those reasons that they have failed to charge the MPs in court. Because remember, the MPs were arrested, accused of breaking parliamentary chairs and microphone stands. They said they would charge them in courts of law. They haven't charged them because they have now since discovered that the MPs actually were involved in a legitimate action of filibustering. The people who were supposed to be charged were the 12 men and women from the president's office, whose names I have, all of them, who stormed Parliament. The second thing that the Speaker, I think, finds herself in new territory is that never before have you had the Speaker preside over contentious issues in Parliament. She's always, I don't remember any contentious proceedings she has presided over. She's always skipped it and left it to Jacob Olanya, and this time
Jacob Olanya skipped it on.
She's stuck with it, and I think that there's just no way she's going to come back from this. Her reputation as somebody who was really perceived to be fair is all gone with this.
How does this fit into the discussion we're having today? You have one, the Speaker, who heads the second arm of government. You have the IGP, also in crisis, thrown in the middle of a crisis. Would you describe this? Ona, what does this mean for you? Because
we are in a state. We are now in a state of military governance. The military has besieged us physically and otherwise.
Well, Kayura could pick up his military uniform.
But
Yes.
At the same time, one could argue that the institutions are having a natural check on them. If the Speaker is being challenged, there's always a battle between the executive and the legislature. And maybe, as I say, the Speaker's letter is it may be a feeble effort to fight back, but it's some way of trying to challenge the executive. And I hope she will at least let the public know that she has got a response. And it will help us.
Depends on what response comes. Because if the response comes like the leaked letter,
the balance of forces is tilted against her. But at least if she can have the strength to write a letter, that's not bad enough.
The next might have a leaked audio.
Yes, because next they're going to leak an audio where someone is going to be saying, you guys can come and I need you to come for them, do what you need to do.
But Charles,
you have a situation, Ivan, whereby the head of the police force is, for all intents and purposes, beleaguered. You have a Speaker who is clearly beleaguered from the discussion we're having. And yes, like Nicholas says, you potentially are looking at the military, particularly the chieftains of military intelligence, expanding its tentacles in different arms of government. There was that interesting headline in the New Vision. The CMI investigating Entebbe women murders. CMI investigating more police officers. You have police officers, a group that's been picked by CMI over over charges of kidnap. You have another group that's been picked by the police itself over charges of making narcotic and ivory exhibits disappear.
I think at the end of the day, what Professor Okonyanga and others have been saying since the 1990s, that Uganda is under a military dictatorship, of course now holds water more than ever before. And if anybody had doubts, those doubts are cast away. And I think, of course, Mr. Museveni has been here since 1986. If you do a survey of African countries, or to extrapolate it, third world countries under the kind of governance challenges that we have, the curve of intolerance and more military involvement in ordinary running of state affairs keeps going up the longer the regime stays in power. You could talk about Zimbabwe, you could talk about Rwanda, you could talk about South Korea and the General Park, you could talk about almost any single country in the third world where military dictatorship is a form of governance. So I think the longer Mr. Museveni stays in power, the bolder the manifestations of that military dictatorship will be playing out. And and the more he will be removing the mask of the military dictator that he is. So nothing really
the man I
surprising.
saw in pictures
It can only
today
get worse.
the man I saw in pictures today doesn't look like that, because the guy who was touring his farm, who is comfortable in his ranch,
but
and
if you've
telling you this paddock had been closed for 4 months now.
If you've seen pictures of General Joseph Kony, the pictures of the man having some good time, even Idi Amin used to play the accordion.
Look,
so
Charles, don't look any further. The only thing left is to appoint army judges. Everything else is being done by the army. Operation Wealth Creation, whether it is NAD, whether it is, we are under a military rule, whether you like it or not. In substance, you can talk about the form. So many times you've had military generals tell you that we will not hesitate to come and take over if you can't clean up. So we are really, for all intent and purposes, under the control of a military rule. The military looks at itself in Uganda as the guarantee of our democracy, not as subservient to the people. They look at themselves as
the guarantors.
They are the ones who guarantee our democracy in essence, so that if anything goes wrong, they look at themselves as the solution. And in fact, Uganda has been under a very subtle, now increasingly manifesting a state of military rule.
But also this is in the culture, political culture of this country. I mean, the strong man, believe in the strong man. Even when you look at the elections, there's a lot of militarization. Even the opposition people tend to mimic military attire and what have you. You know, the way Bessie had his supporters who also having their own kind of military convoy. The population itself believes in a strong man, militarized approach. Remember,
I think they're reacting
like this
to
Entebbe murder. When the police was seen to be failing, there was demand that the army should come in by the relatives of the victims. So we are still, I think, having a history of a population that also believes that you need to have a military might in order to control.
But Connor, just on that point, we are also in a country where we're told 32 years ago that the army needed to go back to the barracks, that the army needed to serve the people. And to ordinary, for all of you gentlemen, ordinarily, in the absence of roadblocks that characterized the period before this government came to power, before 1986, you do not have the military in your face in the way it was, for example, after the 2010 bombings, when you had them at every roundabout. They have receded. So this,
they have only removed the uniform. They've only removed uniforms. I practice the law, and I have been in cases in which people in civilian uniform wielding weapons that are ordinarily weapons of the EPDF have either stormed courthouses to pick up people who have been freed by court, whether in Ngulu or here in Kampala. The only difference is that they are dressed differently, and they have been taken away from the army, now put in police, put in different government institutions. You just have to ask for people's backgrounds and see. Go to the police and ask. There are several units in that police force headed by people who are colonels, people who served with, with IGP in the army. So the only difference is they have removed the army attire and are now coming to your faces using any other, So, but the second thing is that you don't have to see the army, on the street every day. But if there's any semblance of even a peaceful demonstration, it's being quelled by the army. In 2009, the Buganda riots, we have cases that we have filed in court of women and their children who were shot inside their house by nobody else but the army. So I think that you don't have the army like in Rwanda standing at every corner with a gun in their hands, but they're everywhere. And if they have to be deployed, you've seen them in this town.
Someone was talking about the deployment the other day.
I think they believe in the army is not actually limited to Uganda. Look at the current U.S. administration. Trump's sort of salvation is when he has been able to surround himself with generals. And then there is a general commentary that gives him a sense of stability and legitimacy. Because he has a general as the chief of staff, a general as head of intelligence, general as head of defense. So many countries
you're comparing apples and tomatoes.
Hold on, many countries
work.
Yeah, but we are still talking about, first of all, military people are human beings. They are part of the society. They are from within the society.
They are not like
from our
family. Me and you.
It's just about what they do. I have no problem with the military people if they do the right things.
Exactly.
You could equally have civilians who are doing terrible things. The fact that they are civilians does not...
Though the context in which...
the context
in which Mr. P was explaining.
You're talking about the context.
Yeah, was, violation of human rights and the army being abused, not just used, but being abused to suppress the little remaining spaces for engagement for those that have dissenting views from the set of governance. And I think that's what the problem is. In America, you don't have that.
Maybe the question would ask is the role of the military in this particular country and the efforts that have been made to make the military work in the same way the American military works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they can disagree with the president. The Pentagon can have a different position from the White House, and that position will be respected, and there will be a debate, and the American voters will be involved in that kind of discussion. And I don't think they will fall, they will align with the military taking control where they're not supposed to be taking control. But if you're talking about in this particular context, just before you take a break, how do you see this playing out, each one of you? How do you see this playing out in the ongoing age limit discussion? Because we'll come back to that after the short break. But how do you see this, the situation at Parliament, within the police, and the discussion we just had? How does it fit into this debate?
In one sentence, it can only get worse, essentially, because it's a do or die for Mr. Museveni. The pretense that there are going to be consultations and we're going to accommodate views of whoever is dissenting can only be just that pretense, posturing, and attempting to have a facade of democracy.
Yeah, I think it means that the vote will have to be decided before the vote. Because the president wouldn't put the vote in the hands of the speaker if he's not sure of where she stands. So I'm sure behind the scenes they will have to agree, and it will only be in one way, that the vote has to be positive.
In the last election, they apportioned this country into regions and assigned military generals to go and take care of those generals. Of those regions. Northern Uganda was given to the commandant of the reserve force now, who by then was the head of logistics. Teso was given to my good brother, who is now at Operation Wealth Creation. So that's going to happen. They're going to redeploy them to go and secure the vote for the president.
We need to take a commercial break, but we take the break. Yesterday, we woke up to the news of the death of the Ruhama Member of Parliament. He died yesterday morning, and this morning, the death of the former Member of Parliament, Deputy Treasurer, Isa Chikungwe. So 2 losses of legislators. Isa Chikungwe particularly, 3 terms in Parliament and a fairly stellar record.
He ran for Lord Mayor in the last election.
Yeah, he ran for Lord Mayor because he had decided not to run for Parliament. Our sympathies and condolences with the bereaved families, both for the Ruhama Member of Parliament who replaced the First Lady Janet Museveni when she decided not to run again.
He replaced Auntie Charlotte. Okay. No, I'm just asking if he had replaced Auntie Charlotte in Ruhama. I didn't know that.
He replaced it. Okay. Yes, after she decided to bow out of elective politics. We'll take a quick commercial break. When we return, we'll be discussing the national resistance movement is deploying, has carved out the country in regions, and it's deploying a minimum of 2 senior officials from the headquarters to come and mobilize. Someone sent me a message here and says MPs have not failed to market the age limit bill. SEC took a decision to support the efforts of Parliament, or the Parliamentary Caucus, and the action today is in line with delivering on that. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this edition of the Fourth Estate, and we're discussing with Ivan Okuda from the Daily Monitor and the Law Development Center, Ona Pito Ekomoloit, Corporate and Legal Affairs Director at Nile Breweries AB InBev, and Nicholas Opio from Chapter 4 and Action Aid. The statement from the National Resistance Movement Secretariat, dated 4th November 2017, that was yesterday, talks about the ruling National Resistance Movement will, starting this Monday, November 6th, so starting tomorrow, conduct consultative meetings across the country on the age limit bill, among other items. The National Party chairperson, General Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, has already deployed his senior cadres to take lead in the exercise that will last not more than 7 working days. The deployment based on sub-regions will see the party's first national vice chairperson, Alhaji Moses Chigongo, taking charge of the Greater Masaka sub-region. So Greater Masaka, Alhaji Moses Chigongo. Acholi, Honorable Richard Todwong. Kampala, Rose Namayanja, Godfrey Nyakana, and Hassan Galiwango. Greater Luero and Mukono, Haji Abdu Naduli. Greater Mubende, Ruth Nankabirwa. Greater Mpiji, Mathias Kasamba. West Nile, Hudu Oleru, and Haj Nasur Gaddafi. Lango Samengola and Lydia Wanyoto. Karamoja, Simon Peter Aleper and Gabriel Kato. Busoga, Ali Kirunda Kivejinja, Milton Muuma. Bukedi, Mike Mukula. Sebei and Elgon Region, Dominic Gidudu. Teso, Kenneth Omona. Bunyoro, Kahindo Tafire and Oscar Kieka. Rwenzori. Now, on Rwenzori, this is number 15. The people in that region don't know what region is called Rwenzori because it doesn't exist. I have seen a lot of debate. People asking, where is Rwenzori region? It doesn't exist. Maybe this is an NRM creation. Rwenzori, Mataya Chalgonza, and Robert Rukari. Ankole, Major General Jim Muhwezi, and James Tweheyo. Chigezi, Ruhakana Rugunda. The party secretariat in Kampala has already dispatched off its advance teams to different sub-regions to lay ground for the arrival of the senior party officials. Rogers Mulindwa, Communications Officer, NRM. On, I want to start with you. Will this team deliver?
Why are you starting with it? Because I was not listening.
No, I mean, of all of us, you're the only one who has worked.
No. I'm actually surprised that you're not on the list.
Yeah. On the list. I think the first thing is, overall, the NRM initially panicked, so to say, overreacted to the opposition apparent surge in terms of galvanizing the country against the age limit removal. But I think in the last 2 weeks, 1.5, they are kind of regaining the balance, you know. I think there was a lot of panic, of course, which climaxed with those banning of joint opposition rallies, the arrest of Besigye in Rukunjiri and what have you. But since then, the rent-a-crowd kind of approach is working very well, and there is a lot of news pick-up showing that at most the country is divided. Of course, for the president, at the end of the day, this is not about winning the vote in parliament. To me, that is a foregone conclusion. It's about the PR exercise to create an impression that when that happens, at least you have a semblance that the country is in for it. And especially also you need to the MPs to be able to hold their noses as they vote. At least most of them are kind of were terrified. They thought they were being assailed by the population and they can lose in 2021. But when you send a group that is not going to be on the ballot in 2021, generally most of them are political dinosaurs. You are able then to help the MPs say we are not alone, you know, the NRM MPs. So it's kind of give them a sense of comfort that you can hold your noses and go and complete this thing, and you will not be alone. You will not walk alone. So I think this is what.
Nick, do you think this team, you deploy Ndugu Hakana Rugunda in Chigezi sub-region? Some of Chigezi sub-region has been pretty charged. Some of it is supportive. The constituents of, I think, David Bahati has been fairly positive. Other constituents have been extremely hostile. There's an MP who was chased away with stones, was stoned actually, the other day. Amelia Chambade, minister, was abandoned her meeting prematurely. Ruth Nankabirwa herself has had 2 almost aborted meetings because without yes, inconclusive meetings. Aida Nantava and the other NRM MPs. So you pick Mataya Chalgonza, who is on the record in the set meeting, and deploy him in what the NRM is calling Rwenzori sub-region. The NRM is receiving significant resistance on the age limit, particularly in Kabarole district. So Kabarole district for Poto municipality is extremely, has been generally a kind of hostile, and that should be the center of what should be known as Toro region. But it's been sent. So the discussions I have seen from local groups and listening to people from there, they're saying, wait a minute, one, you're not listening to our voices and saying we have a different opinion. Now you're even adding salt to an injury by calling us Rwenzori sub-region. Then you have, it's a genuine sentiment out there. You have Alhaji Musa Chigongo, who's been largely quiet. You're sending him back to Masaka, where he holds a lot of clout, yes. But can he turn around a fairly charged environment like we have? Especially, as Ona says, if you're doing this for public relations purposes, more than securing the vote.
Well, I think that the people of Toro are not going to be consulted because Toro doesn't belong to Rwenzori. So that sentiment is really that you're not consulting him. Maybe they really know what the people of Toro want. But you see, the point is that the MPs have faced a backlash. Not necessarily because these MPs are unpopular, because the things they're trying to sell is hugely unpopular. And I think for me it's a twin tragedy because they're trying to sell the idea of lifting age limit, but also the idea of amending the constitution to allow government to compulsorily acquire land. These two things have combined together. It's a matter of livelihood for many people. It's a matter of deep concerns about...
Well, you say that the land bit has been kind of tempered down now, apart from the mobilization by the president. No one is talking about the land bill because you don't want to mix
these two things have combined in the last couple of months to provide a very negative publicity for the NRM. So the deployment now of senior party leaders is really not, for me, a deployment to change hearts and minds. It's a deployment to just go and distribute more money, to try and what one I call rent a crowd, and watch carefully what they're going to do. I don't think that these people even resonate with the regions in which they are being sent. I don't think has any too much influence in the north. I doubt if Utafira has influence in Bunyoro. So the people they are sending are not being sent to sell a message. No, it is a political deployment for them to just go and deploy money and try and rent the crowd. And if that fails, I think for me that is going to be accompanied by heavy deployment. Watch the deployment, because many of the people who are being deployed are people with deep military background. If you look at most of them. So watch that deployment together with the deployment of the army and the police alongside that. But if that fails, what I think is going to happen is that they'll use that opportunity to map the country, to identify the areas in which they need to do more work for them to win back seats in the next election. Because the discussion about this bill is a foregone conclusion, like Ona has said. Both of us is doing his work in Parliament. That's going to go to the floor of Parliament. It's going to be voted on. What they're doing is doing field work and preparation for the next election.
Ivan, if it's an effort at public relations, it means you're going to have to meet crowds, because you can't deploy Rugunda to Chigezi sub-region purely to talk to religious leaders, selected NRM leaders. On the public relations front, that doesn't win. But if you put Ndugu Rugunda before a crowd and it turns hostile, how do you extricate yourself? Or if you deploy Kahindo Tafire to Bunyoro sub-region and the crowd turns difficult, like that district council for Masindi, I think it's Masindi District Council, which voted to oppose. You have the religious leaders, both the bishop of the Catholic diocese in Fort Portal and the bishop of the Anglican diocese in Fort Portal have joined with the two MPs who are dissenting. So if you gather people from, for example, an area which I'm familiar with, you gather people from Bunyangavu, gather people from Mwenge, Chak and other places, Kamwenge, and try to have a discussion with them, you're still not winning the battle of hearts and minds. How do you...
I think that will be a very big challenge for NRM. The person that authored what you've just read, Mr. Mulindwa, is someone you didn't accuse of having the best command of the English language. So the use of the word consultations for me is essentially an insult of the word consultations, because what they're doing is not consultations. At worst, it's indoctrination, and at best popularizing this age limit bill. So for all intents and purposes, they can be able to manage crowds. In other words, manage who comes to the main hall or whichever facility they're using to consult, quote-unquote consult. I know, for example, in one case in Ntungamo, where one MP who is also a minister did convene people that were possibly friendly to and are members of the ruling party, and some money was reportedly changing hands. And so in that kind of environment, you can afford to avoid the kind of backlash that some MPs have already received. But I also think this is an opportunity for Mr. Museveni, who is the ultimate beneficiary of this amendment, to also share the cake with his senior members, many of whom only become active when there is an election. So they cannot be left out at this time. So that essentially means it's an opportunity for them to have some money to run around the country and consult and be active. But for all intents and purposes, I think as the two panelists agree, it's a foregone conclusion. So it's basically an opportunity for some of these other members to also be seen to be adding value to the debate and possibly take home a few $100s.
But also remember, some of them were said to be lukewarm, at least in the SEC meeting or in other interviews, the media. So when you now throw them in the deep end, they can't again retreat. They will now have to. So
you've secured Aleper's support.
There's now common guilt, so to say. So you have to own the process. So the moment you accept to go to that step, you cannot now say, look, it's the bitter end, because if it fails, we may all suffer.
Gentlemen, I find two things curious. One is that Rogers Mulindwa highlights age limit, even if in his interviews, which I've seen on TV, he tries to say that this bill is about much more than the age limit. But clearly, by communicating this, and I believe it's been sanctioned by the highest organs of the party, it means the party has come to accept that this is about age limit.
But I think...
Number two, what I find curious in this statement is he says President Museveni has deployed his cadres. Now, when President Museveni calls Alhaji Musa Chigongo his cadre, and the Prime Minister, and Nduguru Gonda his cadre, I don't know how
but I think
he's the leader.
I think to give NRM credit, they've been able to salvage the image of the party, because this debate was being kick-started by people that joined the revolution in 2007, like Anite. It was being the frontline actors were kids that were in Pampas when Mr. Museveni came to power in 1986. So, like Mr. Onapito said, the senior members of the party had taken the backbench. So I think this helps to bring the party and give it some vibe when you have historicals like Chigongo and Otafire and Material of Chalgonza being able to champion. But also take exception with the dishonesty of the NRM, especially to the extent that they are not committed to admitting to the people that they claim to be consulting that this is largely about Mr. Museveni. The age limit argument and discrimination and all those points that they keep raising are essentially, for all intents and purposes, dishonest. And I think they need to reflect on how they market the bill, but also market Mr. Museveni, because this is part of the campaign for 2021 election. So I don't know why the NRM members are shy to talk about Mr. Museveni returning, when in 2001 they said we're giving the president one more term, and they even put in that manifesto that was circulated across the country. So to the extent
in
that
the official party manifesto.
So to the extent that they are shy to say this is really about Mr. Museveni and why we need to bring him back in 2021, and therefore the country can have an opportunity to honestly debate whether you're against or pro Mr. Museveni coming back in 2021, I think gets lost. So they should stop being shy.
Indeed, because the argument, when people challenge that a 75-year-old person cannot do certain things, trying to convince them otherwise, when you are talking about a generic 75-year-old person, is not a winner. But you should be talking about a specific person, whom people know that even at 75, he has a brisk step, he can carry a gun, he can do what. So you can say this is not your ordinary 75-year-old person, if you are specific. So they need to become more specific and say, do you, as a Ugandan who has seen Yoweri Museveni, still believe, and we think he can, and you also see him,
They need to
They
hire
can
you
even
for
be
the
no. They can be going with videos.
You'll make a good consultant.
No, they can even go with videos showing him in action.
Yes. Actually, Mr. Museveni is not the hardest person to market. With the kind of population we have.
You've seen my friend Don posting pictures of the president juggling a ball.
Yes, yes.
Taking a few steps as if he's sprinting.
You saw the president run to the podium on Independence Day. Independence Day celebration.
It is part of that PR package to present him as a fit and proper person to contest for presidency.
Yeah, but you see, the president himself does not do justice to the debate. He goes on about the African unification. That's not what most Ugandans care about. They care about whether he is able to hold the country together.
It's the reason I am
nominated.
nominated.
I think that what you're engaged in is a process to legitimize.
Yes. Sorry. Let's look at the individuals deployed in this. Busoga Sub-Region, Alhaji Kirunda Kivejinja. And you're talking about a 75-year-old plus person who should be president. With all due respect, I think if Alhaji Kirunda Kivejinja ever had intentions of becoming president of Uganda, those intentions might have faded or are fading. Alhaji Musa Chigongo, Brigadier General Matayo Chaligonza. When you send some of these people out there, yes, Alhaji Abdu Naduli, send them out to tell people in the rural area, because this is a discussion I've had, in the rural area, people will compare their 75-year person, the one owner is talking about, with the discussion about age limit. And they're going to say, wait a minute, because anybody who has taken care of an older person knows, can this team turn around the perception, especially where it's been difficult?
I don't think that is their brief, because this debate is won in Parliament. What they are giving this debate is really a PR exercise to show some legitimacy in it, so that when it happens, as we know it will, they'll be saying, look, people were consulted, went around the country, and by the way, watch carefully if the other people who are opposed to this process are going to be allowed to consult equally. I don't think so. I think that this is merely an exercise to legitimize, not to change the minds of people, to give an appearance of public consultations. And of course, if they had been smarter, they would have gone the Rwandan way, to go down the villages, have people demonstrate, send petitions to the president, send petitions to parliament. But they have done it the reverse way, and they thought they would have it easy. Because they have faced resistance, they're now walking backwards to try and make it look legitimate, while locking out anybody else who is opposed to the proposal from consulting people.
It goes back to my question. Ramo Monya, who's a lawyer, an advocate in town, is saying the same thing. He says this clearly shows that the NRM thrives on competing with opponents when their legs and hands are tied. He says recently the police had, mentioned Kadaga had stopped joint consultations of members of parliament and said Semu Junganda wanted to go and do a consultation in the constituency of his colleague who is unable now to do her own consultations in Mukono, and the police said, no, that's not your constituency, you can't go there. Now you're deploying these people who don't hold constituencies to campaign for one side of a national debate that should be going either way. But Ona, which
is a bit tactless in terms of PR now, because when ultimately this thing is all concluded, at least there should be no debate that those who are opposed to are stopped. Because right now, since it's not a popular vote, it doesn't matter how much crowds the opposition may appear to garner, it won't change the vote in parliament. So what the president, the NRB should not be concentrated on the appearance that the country was allowed to debate, but at the end of the day, the majority were in support. But now when if they continue stopping the opponents, then even when they win, it will be clouded in that. Of course, a win is a win, but it will be clouded.
You manage the communication for the president. Now you manage you manage communication for a multinational.
Yeah, it's much easier to say that.
I told you 5-year-old man.
Oh no, we could benefit from your experience.
No.
Can you turn around this thing? Because you see, in PR, there are mistakes. If mistakes are made, and they are arrested in good time, they are easier to correct. There is a stage at which certain mistakes can't be corrected. So if you're advising, you're writing a paper, Nankabir, I think, is the lead, and Margaret Mahanga is the spokesperson for the caucus on this matter. Ruth Nankabir has been leading as chief whip. The folks at Plot 10 Chadondo Road, and of course, Plot 1 Nakasera and Plot 1 Entebbe. If you have to advise them, how do you rearrest
I believe the
thing?
guys who are behind the PR are doing a fairly good job. That's why we have agreed that they are shifting from the initial panic and also from leaving the MPs to fly alone to sort of give them protection at the party is with them, because most of them are really scared. You know, I think at the same time they were supporting the thing, but when they went to their voters, they got so scared that 2021 is a no-go for them. But at least if they can appear to be moving with a group, then they can explain their way. They can explain their way in 2021.
Can I put a specific question? I'm sorry, Ivan. Can I put a specific question? If the discussion and the debate has followed over the change, has gone the way it has gone, what projections do you gentlemen make of a President Yoweri Museveni on the ballot 3 years after this contentious debate? What's likely to happen? Is it likely that the same kind of sentiment grows? How do you manage that election in 2021?
I think part of the thinking in the NRM is that 3 years is sufficient time for you to do any damage control. And therefore, possibly that explains why this particular controversial and evil amendment has been brought as early as a few months after the 2016 general election. And therefore, the hope is that you can be able to heal wounds and deal with the backlash from the international community and human rights violations that occur as part of the process before 2021. Whether that can actually be able to temper the anger and frustrations of the people, it remains to be seen, because politics is a very, like life indeed, is a very complex affair. Nobody knew Gaddafi would end up the way he did. Every year we make predictions for...
He's suggesting this way.
we make predictions for the new year, but nobody, possibly even Idi Amin, the same, even Mr. Obote, when he was overthrown, possibly didn't expect things to turn up the way it did. So much can happen between now and then. Nobody has the control of...
I suggest two things. I suggest that the dynamics in election is much more different than this specific issue. I don't think that this issue is going to be carried forward in the election as a specific issue, because many things are going to happen. Secondly, I think that the people in this country are now getting more civically conscious, and they're pushing back. And many of these MPs involved in this debate are going to pay a high price for what they're doing, because the people are watching. I was just telling Ivan that if I was intending to contest in my constituency and you are my MP supporting this thing, I'd be collecting, news bites and sound bites to use, because they're going to pay a dear price. But what I think is going to happen as a result of increased
civic consciousness,
they are going to be more present in the way they deal with the population. You're going to see more high-handed approach to the politics of this country as we go into the next election, on either side of the debate, but worse on the side of those in power.
Ona, your take on this?
Look, for me, I think depending on how it really ends, if it becomes so narrow for the president, the possibility of changing the nature of election cannot be ruled. I mean, this may not be the major last constitutional amendment. I think the possibility of NRM going the route of South Africa, where it's the party that wins, that then ends up changing the president.
The political system.
Because it may, look, if indeed there is a lot of resistance, but then it's just a parliamentary decision, but the popular vote would have gone against the president, then I don't think 3 years is too long for that sentiment to maintain. So either you have a very overt crushing of a popular vote against the incumbent, or you change the rules. In this case, the president should not, if I were to advise, he would not have to be on the ballot, but the NRM, given the financial muscle, can still win the seats in parliament.
And then
You remain
because
the president.
I think I tend to think more in the line of what Ona is saying. I think given the way the population has been reacting to these things, you don't need to assess it from last election and this current debate. You need to look at how things are being strung together from, let's say, about 2001, when Kizza Besigye comes up on the stage. The election of 2001, the election of 2006, 2011, 2016 to date. I think the window period between 2017, if this is closed before Christmas, and 2021 or 2020 when the actual campaigns begin, appears to me to be too short for people to have forgotten and that emotion buried. You need to have one or two things. One, you need to have a lot of money and do a lot of public projects that kind of resell the government, repackage it in a new way. You need operational wealth creation to succeed in a meaningful way to a majority of the people, and you need enough money to be able to pay off, to buy off opponents, including those who have been opposed to this. Can President Museveni marshal those resources between now and the next 3 years? Projections don't look good.
I mean, resources he will marshal. I mean, he's doing Middle East tours and stuff like that. He's going to get the money. Money's not a problem. He can mortgage this country as he's done in the past to get money from all sorts of places. So money he will have, and there will be a lot of money used in the election. That's no doubt. But the debate during an election also depends on who is standing against him. So it depends on so many other things that, in my view, I think that this particular discussion only helps to demonstrate where he has to put more effort, as opposed to whether it will determine whether he gets elected or not. I do think that the longer President Museveni stays in power, the more unpopular he becomes, and the more ruthless his response to hold on to power, both in terms of the use of money but also actual force. And then look at the legislation that's being passed. You know, whether it is in the media space, you know, in civil society, all this legislation is building a framework of laws that, if unleashed upon any opponent, you're just going to be disabled.
Also, Charles,
I'm afraid we need to take a break. Just if you could make it in.
Building on what Nicholas has said, I think your assumption with that, whereas I do associate with your view, presupposes that you have a fair system where Mr. Museveni wins, and indeed NRM wins slots in parliament on the basis or strength of the ideas. Essentially, because if you look at how the last election petitions have been handled, a clearly controlled and managed process, where you had Justice Stephen Kavuma locking himself somewhere in a hotel in Muyenga with files,
election petition files.
So the managed election petitions throughout the Ali Salassos, whom the High Court had given victory because they needed to maximize numbers. They were able to manage the by-elections at the level of bribery. And
the Honorable former Deputy Chief Justice was reading precedents and the laws to come up with... We need to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, restive professional bodies, the strike of prosecutors, I think is still ongoing.
Yes,
it's been running for some weeks now, and medical workers have voted that they will go on strike, demanding for better pay. We'll be discussing that after a short break. Welcome back to this last segment of the Fourth Estate, and I didn't mention the name of the departed member of Parliament. He's William Zinkuratire, I think. Zinkuratire, who passed on yesterday. He's been ailing since the beginning of the year, from what we understand. I had attended just a few parliamentary sessions, and of course we also did mention at the beginning of the show the passing of Alhaji Isach Kungwe, who was DP National Treasurer, but was in Parliament for 3 terms. He was a lawyer, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yes, he was a lawyer. That one passed on earlier this morning and has actually been laid to rest. Zinkuratire will be, the body will be brought to Parliament tomorrow, and there's a special session of Parliament to pay respects to him. Gentlemen, you have all this intense political debate and discussion. Part of the focus has been on the money government has been ready to spend on sorting out what has come to be known as the Majezi Bill. But you have a restive irrespective professional groups, particularly the medical workers and the
state prosecutors.
The state prosecutors. The state prosecutors have been on strike. I think it's 2 months now. Close to 2 months.
They had a strike. They suspended it. The government gave some undertaking which they didn't keep, so the strike resumed now about 3 weeks.
About 3 weeks. So if you put it together, you're running into 2 months of strike by prosecutors, files piling up in courts, suspects, police stuck with suspects because they don't know where to put them. They can't take them to court. They can't do anything with them. You have only emergency windows open for people. Yeah, I think people can file their cases, but they can't be heard. You have the medical workers deciding to go on strike.
State prosecutors handle criminal cases only.
Yes.
The state attorneys at the office of the DPP are the ones who are on strike. State attorneys at the office of the Attorney General are actually working. So civil cases are being heard.
But criminal cases are not being heard.
Criminal cases are not being heard.
Okay. So you're a lawyer. You were once Secretary General of the Uganda Law Society. And because being in human rights, you're handling cases of a criminal nature. Most of the people are indicted by the state, criminal nature. What does this mean? If you could marry it together with the workers, the medical workers' strike, what exactly is being communicated here, and why is government failing to give an adequate response that can temper these concerns?
You know, government can only respond to you if your sector is politically sensitive. If it can cost them votes. For a very long time, state prosecutors have been laboring under a lot of pain. Prosecutors have a lot of work to do, put their lives in danger, and yet they are being paid peanuts. They're not being given the resources to work. I was in Gulu about a month ago. There are 6 judicial officers, including a resident judge, and 3 prosecutors. And judges have to line up to wait for prosecutors. So the state of the judiciary, while we have addressed the question of judges, we've addressed the question of building prisons, if you don't address the question of the investigative and prosecutorial arm of the criminal justice system, you'll be wasting time. And I think that prosecutors have a legitimate concern, and those concerns must be addressed. But the effect of that is that you have many people who cannot find cannot see their day in court because the court just can't work. And therefore, it's visiting a lot of harm on other people who are unintended victims of this whole situation. But 2 things are important. We must address the overall question of the condition of work of our people who are involved in public service. Because I can tell you that the professional police is in a state of quiet resistance, quiet withdrawal. In some cases, they express anger because of their situation. I went to visit the canine section of the police force in the Zambia barracks. The canine section has better housing. Police dogs eat better than policemen. So you have problems that is being increasingly ignored, and unless they address that concern, I think that it's just going to go on, and other sectors are going to join in. Secondly, the response of the state has been defeat. Remember how they convened state attorneys and promised them that they'll give them a couple of things. A couple of weeks down the road, that wasn't done. The response now to medical workers is complete intimidation. They have threatened to declare a state of emergency and arrest all doctors for exercising their legitimate constitutional right to industrial action. So I think that other than respond with threat and deceit, we should confront this issue, deal with it, and resolve it if we actually mean well for our doctors and for our state prosecutors.
Can the government, in the way it is now, or is it digging in? Because some of the sentiment, Honor, that I have had is that the government thinks these professional groups, particularly the medical workers, are taking advantage of a fragile situation where the government is involved in a sensitive political debate over the Land Amendment Bill and the age limit bill.
Yeah, I guess that's a natural answer you'd expect from the people who are out to report from these various entities. They will always try to spin that these people are politically instigated and what have you. But the truth is that, as Nicholas said, public servants, with all due respect, are earning slave wages. we can say that's what you can afford, but given the reality of consumerism that has gripped us, where there's endless needs, which are all being put in our faces. We're in a global world with all kinds of things to consume, and you cannot stop desire. The kind of monies that are being paid in the public service are laughable, you know, and it just goes to underscore the inability of the public sector to deliver, because there's a complete mismatch between motivation and even resources to deliver and expectation. There's no way. So, to me, one of the major amendments, whether it has to be constitutional or otherwise, that needs to be done is to review the entire structure of public delivery in such a way that you only have what you can afford and what you can motivate adequately to deliver. Because you talk to police, I believe that there would be merit in having one policeman who is equipped with all the gadgets that modern policing requires than having 20 perhaps in their current state. On the face of it, it looks like we have a huge police force, but given the inadequacies of the operations, you can only blame them. But it's beyond most, and that's across board. Every school is supposed to have a certain staffing. But one teacher earning 2 million would as well maybe teach all classes in a primary school. You would be so motivated that you would be walking from class to class. Currently, you have so many teachers who are basically really downcast. They are thinking of going to town to get some loans from loan sharks.
No, they're riding their border on the side. So if a student says, I need to run hospital.
The kind of wages the public servants are getting, a majority, of course there are few who are getting really good ones. The majority are getting wages that cannot allow them to really sit in their work and deliver what the public expects from them.
Ivan, how do you contextualize this ongoing debate? The threat by the medical workers is no longer a threat. They'll put it into action. They will only be leaving emergency sections open to deal with emergencies. The prosecutors, one section of the prosecutors has been on strike now almost 2 months. And this can only grow because I think if Mr. Tweheyo hadn't crossed over to wear a yellow shirt, the teachers would be up in arms by now.
He had always worn a yellow shirt, but under the jacket.
I think to be fair to government, if you study data, you don't have the benefit of time to go into the specifics and the statistical evidence available. Wages of, better still, salaries of civil servants have been growing over the last years. The World Bank has done research, for example, that shows how government, on a comparative scale, actually pays far better than the private sector in this country, with the exception of telecom companies and a few players in the service industry. But of course, even with that growth which the World Bank has documented, it's not been to the effect of improving the livelihood of government workers in tandem with the cost of living that's ever going up, and also in tandem with the population bulge and the dependence burden that people have to go through. If you check the Uganda Bureau of Statistics reports every time they do in national census. So I think the crisis then is how do you fix this? And I think we're suffering the effects of governance gone wrong, essentially because the president, for example, did write a few months ago about the need to revisit agencyfication of government and how much money, which he acknowledges is actually being wasted to these agencies, partly function of patronage, so that he's able to employ those that are either on an ethnic basis or political allegiance to himself and the NRM. So there's a lot of money being wasted there. And I think I associate myself with Nicholas and Wanapito's view that what we need is a radical reform which is able, for example, to have an honest and meaningful conversation on how much do you pay your doctors, how much do you pay your teachers, how much do you pay your policemen. But beyond pay, be able to facilitate them. Because the quarrel of many of these people is not just about pay, but also the conditions of work. So doctors, even if you give, I think I was talking to former Vice President Dr. Spesoza Kazon, she was saying you could actually pay doctor 20 million shillings, but you still have the same challenges dogging the health sector. You could pay a consultant surgeon possibly even 30 million shillings. But as long as you're not able to address the infrastructural aspects of their work, you'd be
so the bigger question would be,
yes.
Sorry, you can conclude your, your thought.
For you to be able to have a conversation that addresses all those challenges, I think it takes a decent, serious, and committed government, which is not in place now. I don't know when.
That's the question I was going to put, because if you're not going to have Dr. Margaret Mungerera, who was president of the Uganda Medical Association for many years, for some time, negotiated hard, had strikes, did soft, you tried to use soft negotiation. It never delivered what they wanted. She passed on before realizing it. When this current leadership of the Uganda Medical Workers Association went to make their presentation before Parliament to take their petition, they called it the Mungerera effort, because she really spent a lot of time fighting to get better pay for medical workers. It never happened. You have had almost 15 years of agitation that hasn't been adequately attended to. You've had agitation at Makerere University. I was speaking to a consultant surgeon, and he told me, after Makerere agitated, science teachers at Makerere had their salary enhanced, about 7 million shillings. A professor at Makerere University is at the same level as a consultant surgeon at Mulago. But the consultant surgeon at Mulago gets 2.8 million shillings. Now, why wouldn't someone say, this guy is actually doing the same thing? One is based at Mulago Hospital and does teaching. The other one is based at Makerere University and does teaching of medical workers, but they intersect, they all meet at Mulago Hospital, because there are those trained locally by these hospitals and those trained by the education under the Ministry of Education. Why isn't that discussion, why hasn't that discussion been happening? You've had the example that Ona used. Police, for example. I went 1.5 months ago, in September, mid-September, to Fort Portal Police Station. Semu Junganda wrote about the Lugazi Police Station in his column the other day. They are derelict. The paint that went on those stations during colonial days is wearing off today. It's still the one holding the structure together. You have had a police budget that has grown
to about 400 billion.
From less than 100 billion to about 400 billion. Where is this discussion? Because you need to think about the people, where they work. You first think about the people, where they work, and what they use to be able to deliver. And for a profession as sensitive as medical, is there attention? I have seen some people say the UPDF and outsources their medical attention. So you'll find a lot of UPDF officers either going to the luckier ones, I think, will go to private hospitals where they have insurance. There was that story about the insurance of providing insurance for medical insurance for UPDF officers. You have anybody who is anybody outsourcing their medical attention. Parliament has private insurance. UPDF has private insurance. Other people have private insurance. Is that killing the public healthcare system, the broader public healthcare system? And is that being addressed? Is that part of the discussion we're having?
I think, Charles, what you've been able to explain has been talked about before, but including from government agencies or institutions like the Equal Opportunities Commission that has released several reports raising exactly those issues. The plight of the doctors has been a matter of debate for years. I mean, a small country like Rwanda is able to pay the doctors better. Kenya pays the doctors better. Tanzania pays the doctors better. Our doctors cannot be unable to get pay, essentially because of lack of resources, as government says. So that essentially means there's a problem with allocation of resources. So we then need to ask the question, what is wrong with allocation of resources? And not just in respect to pay, but also being able to fix all the attendant problems in the public service. And I think because we're dealing with a one-man state, you have everything rotating around the president. I was shocked to learn, for example, how the salary of the Chief Justice is going to be raised. The IGG runs to the president, has a meeting with him, and says, I need a salary hike. And then I think someone tells the president, now you're going to have a problem. Because under the law, the Chief Justice is supposed to be the highest paid
Judicial system.
Yeah, yeah. So the IGG was going to be earning more than the
High Court judge.
yes, more than a High Court judge basically is earning more than the Chief Justice. Then the President calls and says, now, you know, Mulegonja came here and then this happened. So I'm going to increase yours. And then the Chief Justice is left in a quagmire because
I am told of a more interesting story about the example you're giving.
Yes.
That one official in that office went and negotiated an enhancement of their salary.
yes.
Then the deputies also went and said, hey, how come there is a negotiation involving one
Yeah.
person, and then others, they also went to negotiate theirs.
So
then the directors, and then the other people, and it became a bigger
So this was the problem.
But
So the Chief Justice was yeah.
what I'm more concerned about is
You can't come to a land like
I
a kiosk.
we all need a doctor, and one would never claim they can advise a doctor on anything because they really know a lot. But
Except your lawyer.
I would imagine what also our public doctors need to maybe shift their debate and say, look, how can we be? The president has indicated that he finds a problem with the way resources are managed, and that's obvious. How can the doctors, who actually are supposed to deliver treatment, which is the ultimate requirement of the medical system for the citizens, be the ones in charge of the money? Isn't there an argument for doctors to form themselves into consortiums such that there isn't all this hierarchy of money flowing from the treasury, and by the time it reaches the doctor, it has disappeared in the midst of all kinds of non-treatment related issues. There is so much money going into talk, for lack of a better word. But in many situations, doctors could actually be saying, we either are running a hospital and the money should be sent for purposes of what a hospital should do. It shouldn't find so many routes to get to us. But the doctors are just negotiating for salary. I think they need to negotiate for control.
Charles.
They need to negotiate for control.
Let me shock
thought
you.
professionals run the ministry.
Let me
I don't know about that.
Yes.
Let me
I only
shock
know
you.
about the person who goes to see the hospital.
Can I get shocked?
Let me shock you, Charles. 1.4 trillion shillings used in the medical sector was money from the American government. They own our health sector. 98% of people who are having ARVs, life-saving treatment, do so because of American money. We don't own our health sector. We're not invested in it. The donors own the health sector. If you have a country in which your government doesn't take seriously the health of the citizens, you know what that means?
Yeah.
They're collecting medical information. They're collecting biodata from you, diseases, viruses, and all these kind of things. They own our health sector. I think first we must begin to have a discussion about the health sector being owned by the government of Uganda and investing in it for the betterment of their
Not owned
people.
by the government of Uganda, owned by the medical professionals.
No, I mean in terms of investment.
This idea of government owning.
Government needs to.
invest.
I think what he's saying
Yeah.
is that government needs to take charge
But if
of the
government
health
has
sector.
failed, for me I believe the doctors should take charge. They are the ones who we go to, and they're the ones who expect.
But now,
Gentlemen,
Mr.
I am being
That's
told
what-
as
that's
time is
the
up, we need to
idea.
get out of
What
here.
is happening?
For me, I'm for the idea.
What is,
Why shouldn't we go
what
for the
is
idea?
happening? What is happening is the doctors are actually owning the health sector by opening clinics.
Yes,
Yeah.
That
they,
means
they,
that
they do.
the health
Look,
sector
so for me,
is
I
in
have
the hands
no
of the
problem.
private sector.
I have no problem
in the
with
hands of
doctors
donors.
having a clinic that is efficiently run,
Yeah.
and public money is put into it for citizens who go into the clinic.
But that's the
That's
argument that
the
people who
argument
have
we are
medical
making.
insurance, medical insurance are not caring about. I'll give you an example. There are many Ugandans who have thought because they have private medical insurance, their health is sorted,
No.
including a former
No.
Minister of Health who died simply because the public healthcare system is dysfunctional.
His name is Malinga.
His name is Malinga. So, Dr. Malinga, our time is out. We need to get out of here, gentlemen. Bernard Imperius, thank you very much for your message. And apologies. I think we had issues with the live streaming. I've got messages from at least 2 regular viewers of this show in the diaspora who couldn't access the signal. And I also got a call from Tom Boijana in Fort Portal who said the signal wasn't very clear. So if you had difficulty getting access to the show, it will be available on YouTube and you can follow this discussion. We encourage all our viewers to follow this, to carry on this debate on our social media platforms, particularly Twitter, and Facebook. You can continue this discussion.
And there's a replay.
Yes, and there will be a replay, of course, on Wednesday. You can watch, and we'll continue discussing this and other issues on the other programming, or on other programming of NTV. If you're interested in following the Rwanda-Uganda story, following the arrest and charging of those police officers over the kidnap of a former AD to President Paul Kagame, you need to pick up a copy of the East African, because there is a story there. And also, of course, there is the story of doing business in Uganda. Doing business.
The ease
of doing business.
World Bank
that World Bank
Index.
report. I think of all the of the 6 East African countries, South Sudan, I'm not sure it's ranked.
No, it is not. Uganda dropped several places.
7 spaces from 115 to 122. Rwanda has improved. Kenya has improved. Tanzania has improved. Nigeria has improved significantly. The rest is...
it means that if you're a business person who wants to go and do business, Uganda may not be your most desired destination.
Yes.
But just I think
Burundi dropped. Burundi dropped. South Sudan is not ranked.
On another day, we could bring the economists to help us. We have things done it before. I was reading The Independent, FDI, foreign direct investment, and in the last 7 years, we've suffered the lowest reduction since 7 years ago. So I think something is just not going wrong with the economy.
And the shilling has plummeted, by the way. The dollar now goes for about 3,648.
Yes.
And with the third quarter code, it can only get worse.
And the sensational Paradise Papers, like the Panama Leaks, because in the Panama Papers were looking for Ugandan names, Ugandan companies we were not able to find. But I'm told, I think... in
the Daily Monitor tomorrow,
Daily Monitor is running something about that.
Tajira has done a good job.
There might be some sensational Ugandan names to pick up from the...
Actually, a cabinet minister is named, so they should pick a copy.
So pick that up, and NTV will continue to bring you up to date with whatever will be going on. From me, thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Ivan. Thank you very much, Ona. Thank you very much, Nicholas. I was told that this show we could have done it O.
The O revolution.
Yeah, the O revolution. Okuda, Onapito, and Opio.
It's one of the few times in Uganda when O's can dominate a space. So
no, they do dominate on these shows sometimes. So thank you very much to you, all our viewers, for joining us, and thank you very much to the production crew that stays up late to deliver this show to you. For me, it's a good night.